I shook hands with the alien woman. She said it was a declaration of war. The orbital embassy had been designed to impress, a massive ring of silver and crystal hovering above Earth, like a crown worn too proudly. Ethan could barely keep his balance on the transparent floors, his legs wobbling every time he glanced down at the swirl of oceans beneath his feet. Whoever thought putting glass between nervous diplomats and planet-sized vertigo clearly had a cruel sense of humor. He clutched the edges of his uniform jacket, reminding himself that today was about peace, not panic, and definitely not vomiting on interstellar guests. The chamber thrummed with energy, filled with Earth's representatives in pressed suits, and the alien delegation in sleek armor that shimmered as if alive. The air carried a faint tang of ozone from the translation nodes embedded in the walls, buzzing like giant insects preparing to gossip. Ethan was only here as a translator, one of the dozens of peace facilitators trained to bridge cultural gaps. He wasn't supposed to do anything dramatic. He wasn't supposed to stand out. He was, in fact, supposed to be invisible. And yet, when the doors parted and Commander Veyra entered, all invisibility in the room shattered. She was almost human, and that was what made her so unsettling. Her frame was tall, her posture perfect, her long ears arching upward in a way that caught the embassy lights like polished ivory. The armor she wore whispered when she moved, faint ripples of energy gliding along its surface, as if the suit itself disapproved of standing still. But it was her eyes, amber, sharp, unflinching, that rooted Ethan where he stood. Everyone else stiffened in either awe or fear. Ethan, of course, did the only thing his nervous brain could come up with. He smiled awkwardly and lifted a hand like he was greeting a neighbor over the fence. His palm hovered in the air, stupidly hopeful. He had read somewhere that their species valued physical contact as a form of trust, a symbolic bridging of souls. Sure, maybe the textbook he read was written by someone with a terrible sense of humor, but he wasn't about to back down now. If peace could be won by handshakes, then by all means, let him be Earth's least coordinated ambassador. Veyra's gaze slid down to his hand. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The room seemed to shrink around them, the translators humming nervously, the humans behind him silently praying he wouldn't ruin everything. Then she stepped forward, her boots clanging softly on the crystalline floor. She took his hand in hers, warm and surprisingly delicate, her grip both commanding and deliberate. She leaned in, so close he could see faint lines etched along the tips of her ears, markings like constellations carved into bone. Her voice came as a whisper, carried by the translation nodes yet still intimate, like it was meant for him alone. This is war. For one surreal second, Ethan thought he had misheard. War? No. Surely she had said, "This is warm," maybe commenting on his sweaty palms. Or "This is worn," a critique of his jacket that hadn't seen a proper wash in weeks. But the widening horror on the faces of the delegation behind her told him otherwise. The room erupted in a storm of shouts, Earth's generals demanding clarification, alien officers baring their teeth in something that was definitely not smiling. Ethan stood frozen, still holding her hand like an idiot who had just tripped into history. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking above the noise. "I think there's been a cultural—" But his words drowned beneath alarms blaring, a siren that meant fleets were already mobilizing. Veyra released his hand at last, her expression unreadable. She didn't strike him down, didn't arrest him, didn't even smirk. Instead, her amber eyes lingered on him a fraction longer than necessary, like he had just passed some private test he didn't know he was taking. Then she turned on her heel, armor rippling with light, and left the chamber with her entourage. The humans swarmed him immediately, shouting questions, accusations, demands. What did you say to her? Why did she declare war? What have you done? Ethan's answer, of course, was the only honest one possible. I shook her hand. If history books were ever written about this moment, Ethan hoped at least one chapter would be titled "The Dumbest Spark That Lit the Galaxy." He was dragged from the chamber before he could argue further, hustled into a side corridor that smelled faintly of metal polish and panic. Somewhere beyond the walls, fleets prepared for battle, commanders barked orders, and humanity braced for war. Ethan slumped against the wall, rubbing his forehead with his still trembling hand. It was ridiculous, all of it. He had wanted to make peace. Instead, he had apparently delivered the universal gesture of aggression. He couldn't help it. Despite the weight of looming interstellar doom, a laugh escaped his throat, wild and inappropriate. Because really, what else could he do? He had just declared war with a handshake, and yet, even through the absurdity, he couldn't shake the memory of Veyra's touch. Warm, steady, lingering. And for the life of him, he swore she had smiled, just barely, when she whispered those terrible words. The world might be ending, but it wasn't without its mysteries. And Ethan, fool that he was, had a feeling his role in this mess was only beginning. Ethan's first week of war began inside a basement full of blinking consoles, half-empty coffee cups, and the persistent smell of overworked electronics. The embassy had thrown him into the language division, which was a generous way of describing 12 exhausted humans hunched over alien transmissions, most of them cursing in 3 or 4 languages at once. Ethan, who until recently thought the most complicated translation he'd ever handle was between British and American sarcasm, now had to decode streams of data that looked like angry constellations having an argument. He squinted at one particularly dense packet of alien chatter. The words shimmered across the screen in their spidery glyphs, looping back and forth in ways no human grammar would tolerate. Somewhere between the threats of orbital sieges and demands for surrender, he noticed something odd. A phrase that translated, quite literally, to tell your cooks to stop boiling your beans so long, you're ruining them. Ethan blinked at it, then read it again, then raised a hand. A question. Did anyone else get a culinary insult in the middle of this tactical broadcast? Half the room groaned. A woman with hair sticking out like she'd fought a wind tunnel muttered, "You've been at the coffee again, haven't you?" But Ethan wasn't imagining it. He ran the algorithm 3 times. Each time, the message slipped past the aggression, tucked neatly between attack vectors. Veyra's voice rang in his memory, and though he couldn't prove it, he felt certain it was her. He tried not to grin, but failed miserably. The others didn't care about his grin. They shoved him more transmissions, demanding clarity on fleet movements. Yet with every stream, Ethan found them. Little interruptions. A joke about human movies having too much kissing. A phrase that literally translated to, "Your shoes squeak like frightened mice." Once, even a pun so atrocious he had to cover his mouth to stop from laughing out loud. Somewhere, buried inside the Empire's thunder of war, Veyra was talking to him. Of course, when he tried explaining this to his commanding officer, things didn't go well. "You're telling me the enemy commander is embedding jokes?" the officer said, deadpan, eyes narrowing like he was deciding whether Ethan was insane or just stupid. "Well, jokes, insults, creative culinary criticism. Look, the point is, she's communicating with me." Ethan insisted. "You're a translator. She's not sending you love notes." "They're not love notes," Ethan said quickly, then paused. "Not yet." The officer's sigh could have powered a turbine. Ethan was sent back to his basement, but the seed had already sprouted. He wasn't imagining things. Someone like Commander Veyra didn't slip jokes into her orders by accident. And if she did, then she wasn't just an enemy. She was something stranger, more dangerous. The war outside didn't pause for his revelations. Each day, the holographic boards updated. Colonies under siege, trade lanes collapsing, fleets colliding in burning arcs across the void. Humanity's cities buzzed with fear. Ethan barely saw the sun anymore. He lived on caffeine, ration bars, and the faint thrill of Veyra's hidden messages. Then, one night, if orbital stations even had nights, he found something different. The transmission came wrapped in heavy encryption, meant for high-ranking officers. He shouldn't have been the one to see it, but faulty routing had dropped it in his lap. He cracked the shell, expecting another tactical demand. Instead, the words scrolled across his screen with chilling clarity. "Meet me at the edge of the Halo Nebula. 1 ship. No escorts." Ethan's stomach flipped. He checked the date, the time stamp. The coordinates shimmered in glowing lines. It was her. It had to be her. He should have reported it immediately. That's what every regulation manual would demand. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Well, Ethan, you're either about to become the galaxy's greatest diplomat or its dumbest corpse." He spent the next 48 hours inventing excuses to borrow a shuttle. The flight officer barely looked up when Ethan signed the log, probably assuming translators were being sent to haul crates of dictionaries across space. No one suspected he was flying toward a clandestine meeting with a woman who had technically declared war with a handshake. The shuttle purred as it slipped into the dark, stars spilling like shattered glass across the viewport. Ethan gripped the controls too tightly, muttering to himself, "This is fine. Totally fine. Just a casual intergalactic rendezvous with someone who might vaporize you before hello." The Halo Nebula bloomed ahead, a swirl of colors dancing like paint spilled across the cosmos. At its edge floated a ship, sleek and predatory, its hull glowing faintly as though it had been carved from starlight itself. Her flagship. The docking sequence began automatically, and Ethan's pulse hammered so hard he wondered if the translation nodes back home could pick it up. He tried one last joke to calm himself. "If I don't come back, someone please delete my internet history." The airlock hissed open. Shadows stretched across the corridor inside, and standing there, framed in the glow of alien light, was Commander Veyra herself. Her armor glimmered, her ears caught the nebula's shine, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that stole his breath. "Translator," she said, her voice a quiet storm. "You came." Ethan swallowed hard, every instinct screaming to run, every other instinct screaming to stay. "Well," he managed, forcing a grin, "you invited me. It would have been rude not to." Ethan followed the guards down the corridor, trying to act like he belonged on an enemy flagship, and not like a man who had accidentally started a galactic war with a sweaty handshake. The floor beneath his boots pulsed faintly, alive with some kind of energy current that hummed like a giant cat purring beneath metal skin. He resisted the urge to ask if the ship tickled when someone scratched it. The guards didn't look like the type to appreciate humor. They were tall, armored, and carried weapons that hummed ominously enough to make him imagine himself roasted like a marshmallow. They shoved him into a chamber that was too wide, too silent, and too obviously designed to intimidate. A command table stretched across the center, glowing with shifting stars, battle maps dancing in 3 dimensions. At its head, Veyra stood with her arms folded, ears angled slightly backward, the universal sign for "I'm in charge," and also possibly annoyed. "Translator," she said, as though the word itself was suspicious. "Commander," Ethan replied, trying not to squeak. Though technically, if you wanted to be formal, you could also call me guy who can't pilot a shuttle without spilling coffee on himself. One of the guards grunted, probably a laugh. Veyra's gaze, however, didn't waver. She circled the table slowly, the holographic stars rippling across her armor. "You should not be here. Your people will think you're a traitor. Mine will think I've lost discipline. And yet—" She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see faint etchings carved into her gauntlets, lines that might have been ceremonial or just very elaborate doodles. "You came." Ethan shrugged, his mouth dry. "Well, you asked. I've always had trouble saying no to invitations. It's why I once went to a wedding where I didn't know either of the bride or groom. Long story, involved a goat." Veyra blinked, as though recalculating what kind of creature she was dealing with. "You joke," she said flatly. "It's either that or scream until my lungs explode," Ethan admitted. "So yes, I joke." For the first time, her lips curved, not a smile exactly, but a faint twitch that suggested the possibility of one in the distant future. She turned back to the table and tapped a sequence into the hologram. The stars shifted, showing battlefronts scattered across human colonies. "My empire fights for survival. Resources dwindle. Your people expand without limit. War was inevitable." Ethan studied the glowing lines, his stomach sinking as worlds he recognized flickered in crimson. "Yeah, but inevitable doesn't have to mean permanent. We could," he hesitated. "We could try something else. Maybe exchange recipes instead of missiles. You already insulted our beans, so clearly you care." That earned him another twitch of her lips. "You think this is a game. I think," he said carefully, "that maybe you don't want this war as much as you claim. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sending me jokes in your battle orders." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Ethan to wonder if he had just signed his death warrant. Then Veyra dismissed the guards with a flick of her hand. They hesitated, clearly unhappy about leaving their commander alone with a fragile human who couldn't bench press a toaster. But they obeyed. The door hissed shut, and suddenly it was just the two of them, standing inside the heart of a warship that could probably vaporize a continent before breakfast. Veyra leaned on the table, her eyes burning into him. "Do you know what a handshake means to my people?" "I have a guess," Ethan said. "I'm living that guess right now." "It is a ritual of challenge," she explained, her voice softer, more measured. "An unspoken duel. To clasp hands is to accept combat, to bind oneself to conflict. When you extended your hand in peace, you declared yourself my opponent. By our law, I had no choice but to answer." Ethan winced. "So basically, I tried to say hi, and instead I challenged you to an intergalactic wrestling match." "That is accurate." He rubbed his forehead. "I really need to start reading cultural manuals more carefully." Veyra studied him for a long moment. "And yet you keep laughing. Even here. Even now." "It's that," Ethan said, "or collapse in a puddle of despair. And I'm not a fan of puddles. They ruin shoes." Her amber eyes lingered on him, unreadable. Then she tapped another sequence into the table. This time, instead of red battle lines, the hologram shifted to show spirals of energy, worlds on the edge of collapse, the slow starvation of her empire. "If peace is possible," she said at last, "you will have to prove it. Not with jokes, not with words, with action." Ethan's mouth opened, ready with some witty reply, but the weight in her tone silenced him. For the first time, he saw not just the commander or the enemy, but someone standing on the brink of losing everything. And somehow, impossibly, she had chosen him to hear it. Still, he couldn't resist at least one more attempt at levity. "Okay, but fair warning, I'm not great at action. Last time I tried to fix my apartment's plumbing, I flooded the building. Heroic action may be slightly above my skill set." Veyra didn't smile. Not fully, but her ears tilted just slightly forward, and Ethan thought, just for a heartbeat, that maybe she wanted to. The ship hummed around them, endless stars drifting through the holographic maps. War thundered outside, vast and merciless. But here, in this silent chamber, the lines between enemy and ally blurred, just a little. Enough for hope to slip through. Ethan was escorted back to his shuttle with more ceremony than he deserved, which, considering his resume included accidentally declared war. Wasn't much. The guards stared at him like they were debating whether humans were edible, while Veyra lingered at the edge of the docking bay, arms folded, ears angled in that impossible halfway position between suspicion and something else he dared not name. He wanted to say something clever before leaving, something that would echo through her alien heart for light years. Instead, what slipped out was, "So, do I validate parking here, or?" The guard shoved him inside before he could hear if she laughed. The shuttle carried him back through the nebulous glow, stars whispering against the hull like gossiping fireflies. Ethan slumped in his seat, replaying every word she had said. Prove peace with action, not with jokes, not with words. Which was a problem, because jokes and words were the only two things he was actually good at. Well, that and making terrible coffee. And none of those seemed particularly galaxy-saving. Back on Earth, things had only gotten worse. The news feed screamed with images of colonies burning, defense councils bickering, civilians rioting over shortages. Ethan, meanwhile, was shuffled into yet another underground command center, where generals stared at battle reports like they were playing the universe's most depressing board game. He offered to translate intercepted transmissions. They ignored him. He suggested alternative strategies. They ignored him harder. Finally, in a moment of frustration, he muttered, "You know, if you actually listen to what they're saying, you'd notice they're not as bloodthirsty as you think. They're desperate. There's a difference." The room fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned on him, each one a different flavor of disapproval. Ethan cleared his throat. Or, we could just blow more things up. That works too. They dismissed him faster than a bad punchline. But the thought lingered. Desperate. That was the word Veyra hadn't said but had shown him in the star maps. Her empire wasn't thriving on war. It was suffocating without resources. Humanity had abundance. They had scarcity. And Ethan was the only idiot alive who had accidentally stumbled into that truth. So, naturally, his solution was smuggling food. He started small. Protein packs slipped onto unmanned drones, routed accidentally into enemy space. When no one noticed, he escalated. Whole crates of grain disguised as wreckage, floating conveniently into alien recovery paths. It was reckless, it was illegal, and it was very likely the sort of thing that would earn him a firing squad if anyone found out. But it worked. The enemy transmissions he intercepted changed tone, just slightly. Less fury, more confusion. Once, he even found another of Veyra's hidden jokes buried in the data. Your ration bars taste like compressed sadness. He almost spit out the one he was chewing when he read it. Weeks passed this way, Ethan juggling his official work of decoding threats with his unofficial work of sneaking hope into the void. He barely slept, running on caffeine and paranoia, until one night an encrypted message pulsed across his console. Stop sending food. You'll be caught. Meet me again. Coordinates followed, different this time, somewhere between contested zones. Ethan knew it was madness. He also knew he was going. The rendezvous point was an abandoned mining station orbiting a dead moon, its hull cracked and bleeding rust into space. His shuttle latched onto a docking port that creaked like it hadn't been used in a century. He stepped inside, heart pounding, flashlight flickering across hollow corridors. And then, there she was, Veyra, standing in the dim light, her armor stripped down to something simpler, her expression harder to read without the battlefield glare. You're reckless, she said, not bothering with greetings. You say that like it's news, Ethan replied. Her ears tilted, the alien equivalent of an exasperated sigh. If your leaders discover what you've done, they will execute you. If your people discover what you've let me do, they'll execute you, Ethan countered. So, hey, at least we're equally doomed. Her amber eyes softened, just barely. Why? He hesitated, then grinned weakly. Because peace is cheaper than coffins, and because I'm apparently terrible at following instructions. Silence stretched, filled only by the groan of the station's ancient frame. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a low, surprising sound, like a ripple in gravity itself. You are infuriating. Thank you, Ethan said, bowing dramatically. I try. The laughter faded, but something lingered between them, fragile and strange. They walked the station's corridors together, speaking in half-confessions, half-banter. She admitted her empire's desperation openly this time, how their systems were collapsing under scarcity. He admitted humanity's arrogance, the way Earth expanded without looking back. Each word was a risk, a betrayal of their own people, and yet neither stopped. When they reached the observation deck, the cracked glass revealed the dead moon, hanging like a scar against the stars. Ethan leaned against the railing, trying to lighten the heaviness. So, just to be clear, if I ever shake your hand again, am I declaring round 2 of this whole war thing? Veyra's ears tilted forward, her lips curving into something dangerously close to a smile. Perhaps. Or perhaps it would mean something else. Ethan swallowed hard, the joke catching in his throat. Something else. He didn't know what she meant, not fully, but he wanted to. The war outside raged on, vast and merciless, but inside that dying station, for a fleeting moment, 2 enemies stood side by side, not allies, not yet, but something balanced precariously between defiance and hope. And Ethan, fool that he was, decided he liked the view. The war ended not with an explosion, not with a final heroic charge, but with Ethan standing in yet another conference chamber, wondering if he should have worn a cleaner shirt. The air buzzed with tension. Human generals sat stiffly on one side of the table, alien commanders on the other, everyone glaring as though eye contact might vaporize the other party. Between them, the translation nodes hummed, ready to turn insults into diplomacy and diplomacy into misunderstandings. Ethan, as usual, had been told to sit quietly in the back and not ruin anything. He nodded solemnly, already planning to ruin something. Veyra entered with the same precision she always carried, every step measured, every glance sharp. Her ears flicked upward when her eyes found him across the chamber, and for a brief, impossible instant, Ethan thought she was suppressing a smile. He tried not to wave. He failed. She gave no outward response, but he could have sworn the tips of her ears twitched like someone caught between amusement and annoyance. The talks began. Demands were shouted, accusations thrown like knives. Humanity demanded reparations. The Empire demanded withdrawal. No one budged. After 2 hours of this, Ethan leaned toward the officer beside him and whispered, "I've heard family dinners less hostile than this, and mine once ended with a gravy boat being used as a projectile weapon." The officer glared at him, but Ethan wasn't wrong. The talks were a disaster. Then came the moment. Another stalemate, another insult, another reminder that they were all one sentence away from walking out and resuming the slaughter. Ethan's nerve snapped. He stood. Enough. The room went silent. Every general and commander turned to him like he had just insulted their grandmothers. He swallowed hard but kept going. "We've been fighting for months, and what has it gotten us? Dead colonies, ruined fleets, ration bars that taste like sadness. This isn't strategy. This is stubbornness." The human general barked. "Sit down, translator." "No," Ethan said, surprising himself more than anyone else. His voice shook, but he kept going. "You all think I'm a fool, and you're right. I started this war by accident. I've made more mistakes than anyone here, but I've also seen something none of you will admit. They're not monsters, and we're not saints. Both sides are terrified of losing everything, and if you'd stop screaming long enough, you'd realize there's another option." He looked directly at Veyra then, forcing himself to hold her gaze. "We don't need more battles. We need trade. They have knowledge we don't. We have resources they need. We can keep throwing ships at each other until the stars burn out, or we can start actually sharing." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The generals shifted uncomfortably. One of the alien commanders hissed in disapproval, but Veyra raised a hand, silencing him. She stepped forward, her voice clear, her words ringing with authority. "This human speaks the truth. War was forced upon us by ritual, but it does not bind us forever. Let us write a new ritual, one that unites instead of divides." Silence stretched. Then, cautiously, one of the human negotiators asked, "And what ritual do you propose?" Veyra turned her gaze back to Ethan. The handshake. The room froze. Ethan nearly choked. Just to clarify, last time we did that, things escalated a little." "This time," Veyra said, her voice softer, "it will mean peace." Every eye fell on Ethan. His palms went clammy. He stood, hard hammering, and stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand again, the same gesture that had ignited war. Veyra approached, every step echoing. She clasped his hand, firm, steady, her amber eyes holding his. "This is peace," she whispered. The translation notes hummed, carrying her words across both sides. No alarms blared this time. No soldiers shouted. The chamber remained still, stunned, as the meaning sank in. It wasn't immediate. Treaties still needed to be written, fleets recalled, borders redrawn. But in that moment the war ended, not because of armies or strategies, but because two people refused to let hatred be the only language spoken. Weeks later, Ethan sat in a half-repaired colony outpost, watching cargo ships loaded with supplies cross into alien space under escort. He sipped the worst cup of coffee he'd ever had, which was saying something. Veyra stood beside him, her armor traded for lighter garb, her ears twitching as she studied the bustling docks. "You risked everything," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, but if I hadn't, I'd still be hiding in basements decoding angry space poetry. This is better." She glanced at him. "Do you always cope with jokes?" "Pretty much," he said. "Keeps me from screaming until my lungs collapse. Plus, sometimes they work." Her lips curved, faint but real this time. Sometimes. They stood in silence, watching two worlds, once enemies, begin to stitch themselves together. Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. He hadn't just grown braver. He'd grown into someone who believed his voice mattered, even when it trembled. He raised his cup in mock toast. To peace. and to never shaking hands the wrong way again. Veyra's amber eyes sparkled. Careful, human. One more handshake, and who knows what you'll declare? Hopefully not war, Ethan said. Maybe just dinner. For the first time, she laughed, bright, unguarded, echoing like new stars being born. And Ethan, for once in his life, didn't feel like the joke. He felt like the beginning of something worth believing in. The end.